To do a rebuild or a renovation of our current organ, which is a Zimmer organ out of Charlotte, North Carolina. The Zimmer company originally came from Europe, and this was put in by money raised by our members in 1982. So I have to assume that the renovation project raising money probably began somewhere in 1980. I don't know if Nancy or some of the others can verify that, but it takes a while, and it was a completely new instrument, all right? What I played here a minute ago for the people who were here from the service and people who are at home, this is a tiny, tiny little pipe. Sounds like a dog whistle. And Amy has a very large pipe, and she is going to be on a microphone, and she's going to start talking about the organ in here. I'm just going to turn it over to her.
Okay.
If you want to go online, YouTube, and you can watch those slides when Milton throws them up. Amy, it's all yours.
This is one of the facade pipes that are probably taken from the 1915 organ. They spray painted them gold, they put them in the front, so they're not functioning right now, they're not hooked up to anything. But in contrast to Mary Ann's, it does play. It does play. One of the most common, one of the most frequent comments I've been getting, can you all hear me okay on this? Is that the organ sounds fine to me, is what people keep saying to me. When my mother-in-law passed away in December, one of the items we had to figure out what to do with was her car. And I knew it was old, I knew it wasn't in very good shape. In fact, right before she went to the hospital, she smashed the driver's side window. So we called the insurance company, we got the driver's side window fixed. She passed, and we were trying to decide what to do with it. We were going to take it up to a friend of ours, somebody that we trust in Central Park, to give us an honest assessment whether it was worth selling or not. In order to take it, the 20-minute drive from the courthouse up to Central Park, I had to jump start it twice. There were glass shards everywhere on the inside that were never cleaned up. The headlights didn't work. The inside panel lights didn't work. The turn signal did work, Aaron confirmed. The car shimmied terribly as I was driving it, so much that I was afraid I would not make the 20-minute trip. I had Aaron follow me in his car behind. We did make it up there with a lot of noise, a lot of rattling, and my friend wasn't in the office, so I handed the keys to the guy at the counter and said, here's the car. He had no idea what I went through to get it there, but the car did its job. It got me from point A to point B. Obviously not in good shape, but it served its purpose just as well as Aaron's car, which worked perfectly fine. It got me from point A to point B. Ironically, during the last hymn, this light bulb has been flickering on and off. The whole service, it just came back on again, but it was off, talking about things that need fixing. I have a handout. I don't have a lot of them, but for anybody that wants one, the choir had most of them. I do have a few more. This handout is going to be online because there are some links in it, and some very interesting videos if you want to see how old organs were pumped. A really quick history, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but really quick history is, we all know the first church building was a small wooden frame building about a block and a half away. And from doing a lot of research and digging through the archives, we know that they did not have an organ over there because it was very common at that time for choirs to be accompanied by what was called a bass viol, which is something similar to a viola da gamba, or it's an ancestor of our modern string instruments. It kind of looked like a large cello. And as far as we know, there was no organ over there. When this building was built, we have no idea if there was an organ here or not. We don't know because pretty much all of our historical records were lost during the Civil War. So there's not a whole lot of information from 1933 up till about 1965. We know they made a big deal of opening up the church again in 1966 after the Civil War. There's lots of documentation about that. There is talk about when they rebuilt the church. We really don't know if the church looks exactly the same now as it did pre-Civil War, or if they redesigned it. There's absolutely no mention of the balcony area. We know that downstairs pews were taken out, carpets were ripped out. We know all that. There's no mention of anything in the balcony, so we have no idea if an organ existed up here or not. There is mention in 1877 in the session minutes, the person who was the secretary recording it, they had a report on finances in September of 1877, and they listed in the minutes, which is over in the church building in the archives, salaries for the pastor, the sexton, who's the custodian, and the organists, plural organists. So we know that there was an instrument in here. We don't know what kind it was. Chances are, when the building was built, and there's no evidence, this is just totally a guess based on what was commonplace practice at the time. When the church was built, they probably eventually got rid of the accompaniment by the bass viol, and they probably had a reed organ because that was the most common. Reed organs would have been pumped by hand, or they could have been pumped by the player with their feet if they didn't have a pedal rank. They were freestanding instruments. You pick them up, take them with you, not easily, of course, but they weren't connected. They weren't permanently installed in the building. By the time we see those references to organists in 1877, it's after the Civil War. Chances are a more permanent organ was in place. In 1880, the French Memorial Chapel was built, and they were very, very clear in their description of the building when it opened in 1880. Up front, there was a chancel. To the right, there was a pipe organ pumped by hand. The person who pumped it was around the back. In the front of the organ, there was a choir stall for the choir. So we know that there is an organ over there. And there's references in 1877, now a few years earlier, to organs in this church. So at that time, we're thinking there were 2 existing organs on campus. Both had to be pumped by hand. There's another very interesting story that I found, which is in the handout, about the sexton who was resigning, and they found somebody to replace him, and he said, I'll do the job as long as I don't have to pump those organs. And so he was even willing to do the job for a lesser salary if he did not have to pump those organs. So they found a boy to pump the organs, both in the chapel and in the church here, for Sunday school and for services. And apparently he did not do his job well, or he didn't show up most of the time. So they went back to the new sexton and they said to him, sorry, you're going to have to pump all the organs, and they made his salary less than what the previous one was. I guess finances were tight in the 1880s, but this documentation is from 1881 that I found. There are links in the handout. If you don't have one, I have a few left, but you can get the handout online, and there are links in there to some YouTube videos on how incredibly tedious and thankful that job is to blow the bellows on the organ. You're just constantly moving the levers for as long as the organist needs you to. It is quite tedious. In 1915, the checks came from the government to all the churches downtown for damages to the church from the Civil War. The government was paying everybody back. In 1903, we had a lawyer who was actually starting to sue the government, wondering why decades after the Civil War this money hadn't come in that was promised, and actually pursued it for many, many, many years. In 1914, in November, was when Session had a meeting and presented it to the congregation, and they said, we need to start an organ fund, we need a new organ. And then, all of a sudden, in early 1915, the checks came, probably unexpectedly from the way it was written. It sounds like they weren't expecting it, and everybody thought, wow, this is great, what a perfect timing. This session called another meeting, and then came back and presented to the congregation, Anybody that had contributed to the organ fund, we are actually going to pay you back, and your money is no longer needed because they used the check from the government instead. And that's how the organ in 1915 was installed. And that organ was installed from the SD company, and which is a very well-known organ builder at the time. That company has since closed. They closed in 1960. And that organ stayed here for probably 70 years. And nobody step on this. I'm just going to set it down here.
And that pipe she's holding was that organ, correct?
Yeah, the gold pipes from the front are very likely, I can't prove it, very likely from that 1915 organ. They just spray painted them gold and repurposed them for that. When you have a pipe chamber, you need something in the front to keep hands and things from going inside and bothering what's in there. So sometimes we put a screen, but more often they put decorative pipes in the front, and that's what they did for this one, is they just took the old pipes, spray painted them gold, and they're decorative, even though they still play. They don't play because they're not attached to anything right now. So in 1915, this organ was installed. It stayed here until 1982. We all know the French Memorial Chapel burned down. The organ that was in there, that was installed in 1880, lasted until the chapel burned down. Newspaper accounts confirm that. It was the original organ from when the chapel was built. So this one was installed in 1915. It stayed until 1982. And the complaints that I found in documentation just state pretty much the same thing that we're saying about this one, is that the wiring had worn out, the magnets and the switches and everything, and the leathers and everything was very deteriorated after 70 years. And they decided to just replace the whole thing. The Zimmer Organ Company was the company that they went with from North Carolina to build this organ, and they were very concerned with the cost of the organ at the time, and they did build this very cost efficiently, which is why it needs a lot of attention. Before I can really get into some specifics about what needs attention, I'm going to take a minute to very quickly explain how everything works. And in the pipe chamber, obviously we have the pipes. And so when we talk about pipe organs, most people, this is what they're thinking. They're not thinking of this part, but they're thinking of this part with all the pipes. But there aren't just pipes in there. We have the fan, which is the blower that blows the air through. You have a lot of tubes. Ours are plastic right now, since from 1982. And you have all the tubes that direct the wind into all the chambers. The pipes are divided into two sections. All the pipes that are controlled by the top manual, and then all the pipes that are controlled by the bottom manual. There's also a panel board in there, a circuit panel board that has a lot of computer chips and things that control the wind chest and the pipes and all that kind of stuff. We have on our organ what is called an electro-pneumatic action. And really there's only two types, electric and what we call tracker. The Episcopal Church across the street has a tracker action. And what that means is there is an actual wire connected to the key, and every time you push the key down, the wire pulls a lever, which in turn pulls another one, which in turn pulls another one, and so on, until it physically connects to the pipe, opens up the slider, which allows air to go through. It's very complicated, it's very expensive, and things go wrong with it all the time. It's more common nowadays to find electro-pneumatic, which is what we have, and what that means is we have a lot of magnets and switches and things like that, and wires. When I push a key down, it activates a switch and a magnet. I took the lid off the console right here so that you can see inside, and most people will be surprised to see it's really mostly hollow, except for the rows and rows of chips and wires and things like that. The issues that we're having are almost all in the console. There aren't that many issues in the pipe chamber. On the console, we have two manuals. The top manual is called the swell. The bottom manual is called the grate. You have all the pedals. I'm going to move this real quick. It's going to make noise. Except that you have your camera on over here. Am I blocking the camera? Just so you can see from down there. The rows of pedals play notes just like the manuals do. It's not on right now, so that's why they're not playing. There is something that looks like a gas pedal at the bottom that controls the swell shades, which I'll talk about in a minute. Then there's a row of, we only have 5 toe studs. That's if I don't have a finger free to push one of these 5 buttons, my feet can push the button instead. On the right, we have a computer panel that was installed secondhand. It's a used part. The organ company, at one point, we had a pull-out drawer with really super old-fashioned computer toggle switches, and that's how I programmed the organ. They got rid of that and put something a little bit more modern in. When you look inside the pipe chamber, the technician has come in and has told us the pipes are actually in very good shape. We also really very much appreciate the design of the pipe chamber. We think it fits our church very well. We think it fits the space very well, and we don't have any intention to change the look of the pipe chamber. When this organ was installed in 1982, they told us that this chamber was the original pipe chamber from 1915. It may have been from earlier than that, I don't know, because the papers don't go back that far. But Paul Robb said that it was pushed back to make more room for the choir. And I know when I got here 25 years ago, the choir stood around the organ, leftover tradition from when Paul Robb was trying to conduct from the organ. So I know the chamber was pushed back, but as far as I know, it's the original one from 1915 and maybe even earlier than that. So the pipes are in pretty good shape. The blower, the fan, and the tubes are obviously 40 years old. They're going to look at that and see if it's going to last another 40 years. One of the things you'll see in the pictures is what most people call the bellows. They're actually not bellows inside. They're pressure chests. If you look carefully at the photos, you'll see white leather tape around the edges, which is sealing the air inside. And there are these flat metal springs that are putting pressure on the pressure chest, on the wind chests. So the wind chests fill with air, and the springs put pressure on it, and that's what's pushing the air through the tubes to run through the pipes. When you push a key down, the pipes sit just in a hole, and there is a slider that opens up and allows air to go through that pipe. And as soon as I release the key, the slider closes, and that's why the pipes are all not making noise all at the same time. They all individually open and close. So on the inside, the white leather tape that seals the air into the pressure chests is now 41 years old. The average lifespan of those tape, it's leather, it does wear out, is, they told me, 40 to 50 years. Even though they are not leaking right now, they will soon. They will deteriorate, and that is part of the renovation, to try to replace those tapes. When you look inside, you see there's not very many of them. There's 3 pressure chests. And so that's just something we're going to do proactively, make sure that they are in good shape and they will last for a while. Other than that, things are in pretty good shape. When you look at the divisions, that means all the pipes for the top manual are here and all the pipes for the bottom manual are here. The top manual pipes, the swell pipes, are in a box in the back. In the front of the box are these, they look like Venetian blinds, they look like vertical blinds, and they open and close. That's what this gas pedal is for. If you look through the gold pipes, you can see them opening and closing. We will go inside and you can see them as well. When I first got here in 1998, the organ was only 16 years old. And within the first 2 years, there were already a lot of things that were not working. And one of the things were those vertical blinds. Every time I pushed the gas pedal up and down, they just didn't open, they didn't close. The reason they open and close is to provide about this much control over volume. It's not a lot. That means the pipes that are in the front that aren't enclosed in that box, all the pipes that are on the bottom manual, I have no control over volume on those. You change your volume by adding more ranks, and you soften it by deleting ranks, but otherwise it's on or it's off. You can't change the volume. The top manual, I'll show you how much control I have over it. It's not a lot. has these shades. This is loud, and that's soft. That's it. So not a lot. Not a lot of change. The technician, let me back up. When I first got here, that was one of the things that wasn't working reliably. We also had the pedals were not playing half the time. The technician took the pedal board off, looked at it, and saw that there was 1 wire of contact per pedal. Normally there should be 4, because with electrical arcing, the wires will wear out after time. And after 20 years, they were all so worn that they just weren't playing anymore. We took the pedal board out, and I have some of the repair information from that. I was probably here for 2 years at that point. It was right around 2000. They took the pedal board out, promised to bring it back on Sunday. I showed up on Sunday. It wasn't here. And I ended up having to play with no pedals. They brought it back the following week, rewired the whole thing. That's been okay since then. The memory select panel that we replaced from those old-fashioned toggle switches was a used part. A lot of times when I come in, and it's funny, I swear it's with the weather, it's seasonal. Sometimes I turn the organ on and I look, and there's an LCD panel. It goes from 1 to 32, and when I turn it on, I can see the numbers flashing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and it goes through 32, and then it scrolls around and around and around. And the only way to shut that off is to hit one of the buttons. It sometimes malfunctions and sometimes does not. Every time the technicians are here, they've never been able to reproduce the problem. They've never been able to fix it, even though I've described it. Because if they can't reproduce it, they don't know where the issue's coming from. That's been doing that for years. These presets, these 5 buttons here, preset these stops so that I don't have to do it all by hand. They sometimes work and they sometimes don't. Sometimes, especially number 5, when I push number 5, instead of all those tabs going down and staying down, they'll all go up, down, up, down, up, down. They'll flutter like this, uncontrollably. And because that's unreliable, sometimes I just have to come over and hand register and pick the ones I want, because these buttons don't always work the way they should. At one point, the technician thought it was the actual button, and so he was going to replace it. Went back and looked at specifications from the Zimmer organ company, and instead of using our normal type of pistons, which stick out a little bit so that I can find them without looking, they just used regular doorbell buttons. And they said, if you need to replace it, just go to Lowe's and buy a doorbell button. So that's what the technician did, installed it, and that's why our number 5 is blank. It doesn't have a number on it, because he just bought a blank button from Lowe's. But even with replacing the button, it still does that every once in a while, so we know we haven't fixed the issue. A couple of years ago, I think this was pre-COVID, during the service, the choir sang their introit. I went to turn all these stops off by pushing this C cancel button, and they should just turn off so it doesn't make noise. It doesn't actually accidentally make a sound during the service. I hit the button, nothing happened. Pushed the button again, and a bunch of wires fell down at my knees. So I quickly tucked them all up with the only thing I have on the console is a bunch of Post-it notes, so that's what I used to stick the wires up. And I quickly reprogrammed number 3 to be blank, which essentially would make it a cancel button. But then I didn't have the number 3 then to use normally. And there are other issues. Pretty much, I would say 95% of the issues we've had with the console have to do with the electronics, the wiring, and the computer chips. And like Jim Christie said to me a couple of weeks ago, we all update our phones, our tablets, and our computers every few years because anything older than that is just very outdated technology. And what we have here on the console is 40-year-old wires and computer chips. And like I said at the beginning, it's not the pipes that we're concerned about. It's all the electronics, which we've already fixed a bunch of things. Back in 2002, And this is after we already rewired the pedals, had already fixed a few things like the control panel and all that stuff. We were still having so many issues that the organ company, and I have the proposal in my, here it is, in my folder. I brought it with me. In 2002, came up with a proposal to rewire and update the console. And they gave us a proposal and handed it to Alan. He handed it to me. We looked at it. And I very clearly remember showing up, it was in January, in the parking lot. It was snowing. He comes out to the parking lot and he looks at me and he says, well, our renovation project inside, if you all remember the scaffolding and the paint and the wallpaper and that issue, he says, today they were painting and after so many layers of paint, the wallpaper just crumbled and it all fell down. He says, my renovation project just tripled in cost. We're going to have to put the organ to the side. And that was in 2002, 20 years ago, when we wanted to fix the console. 20 years later, we're still dealing with the same issues. And it's kind of like our aging HVAC system that John Copley was always putting duct tape and fixing like MacGyver with paper clips and things. And it's kind of, that's what we've been doing. Mary Ann already told you the story a couple of years ago. One of the springs broke, snapped in half, and Les and Milton came around, and that photo is online as well, and fixed it with some bungee cords and some paper wedges because the spring pushes the pedal up. Without a spring, it falls down and it's constantly on. So if they didn't do that and deactivate it, you would have heard this the entire service. And there was no turning it off. The only way to turn it off was to turn off the whole organ. So they came up and they rigged it so that it wouldn't do that, but then I couldn't use the pedal, and it's right smack in the middle of the pedal board. So I had to rework all of my pedal passages and things before the service started. But it's just things like that, and it's always unexpected. You never know what's going to happen on any given morning. I come in and I turn it on, and it's something new every day. So at this point, the recommendation is pretty much the same as it was 20 years ago, to take the console out. And again, we feel the design of the console fits the space perfectly, just like the pipe chamber. We don't plan on changing the design. Most of you won't notice anything different, but the proposal is to take it out and tear out all of those wires and computer chips and just update them with something that is a lot more reliable. They are going to change this row of tabs. That will look different. That memory select control panel, the LCD thing on the side, will look a little bit different. These 5 preset buttons, there goes the light bulb again, are going to change. There will be more than 5. It's actually unusual for an organ to only have 5 and to only have 1 gas pedal here. So they're going to update it to have 2, which is standard, 2 gas pedals down there. One is called a crescendo, and the other one is the swell shades. And they're going to have more than 5 presets. One of the things that we've been talking about for a long, long time is that the organ only has 13 ranks. And what that means, it only has 13 sets of pipes. In contrast, the Episcopal Church has about 60, the Methodist Church has 30, 35-ish. We don't really have room to add any more pipes in there, and anybody that comes up to look inside and crawls in with me, you'll know that right away. There's really not room. We don't feel that expanding the pipe chamber right now is a smart idea. Because any type of cosmetic change you make to the church involves the Historical Society, and we just kind of don't want to go there right now. So one of the solutions is to add some digital ranks. When the Methodist Church in 2008 did a rebuild of their organ, they added about 20 digital ranks to their organ. And they called all the organists in town to come do a grand concert to celebrate the opening of the new organ. And we all went over there and we performed a concert on a Saturday afternoon. And the digital ranks, you cannot hear the difference between the digital ranks and the actual pipes. The technology is just really, really good right now. You really can't hear the difference. What they will do is install some speakers in the pipe chamber for the digital ranks. There is one large speaker that will have to be probably on this side, outside the pipe chamber, because it won't fit inside. But the proposal for the work is not just taking the console out, rewiring it, rewiring the pedals, and just updating the technology so that it's reliable, but it's also installing some of those digital ranks. To make the organ a little bit more functional, when guest organists come over, I usually spend 15 to 20 minutes explaining the quirks of our organ and what works and what doesn't. And you know, sometimes they look at me and they'll say, well, you have all these presets, you just don't have a lot of choices here. So I explain to them how to set the pre-programmed pistons and the memory select. And a lot of them just say, you know, you just don't have a lot of choices here. Sometimes it's just easier for me to do it by hand, which is sometimes what I do as well. But the digital ranks just give us a little bit more extra sound. It's not necessarily a volume thing, but just a little bit more variety in sound. If you listen to recordings to big church organs, or even if you listen to the Methodist or Episcopal church, you hear a lot of sounds and instruments and colors and things that we just can't do because we don't have them. So that will give us a little bit more functionality. There is a microphone that goes inside the pipe chamber that tracks the tuning of our pipes so that the digital ranks always are in tune with your pipes, which obviously I'm not going to change every day. It gets tuned twice a year. So the digital ranks have been around for a long time. Like I said, the Methodist Church, they did that in 2008. And it's still there, it's still working great. And when I performed over there in that concert, you cannot tell when you push the stops, you can't tell which ones are real pipes and which ones are digital ranks. I am not reading off of the handout, so does anybody have any questions? I think I went through everything. That was really important, trying to keep it brief. If you are interested in coming up, and I think if you are, you're probably already here, but if you would like to come up and see some more, you are welcome to. I took the top off the organ. You can see inside. There's really nothing here. It's pretty empty except for the wiring. But we can go inside the pipe chamber and take a look, and I can show you how that all works as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Did they look into making the whole thing electronic?
Making the whole thing what? Electronic? No, I don't think we want to get rid of the pipes we have. We have 2 ranks of pipes in here that are original from the 1915 organ. And when you look inside, you can see them. There is a wooden rank of pipes that belong to the pedals, and there's a Celeste rank up in the swell box that belonged to the 1915 organ, and they still play.
How about they just put a speaker in the bottom of the mic?
Yeah. No, they're not going to do that. We're going to keep what we have, so the digital ranks just add to it. Just add to it. So if anybody wants to see, though, I'm going to turn this off.